I now considered myself to be a spiritual atheist, because I still thought of myself as a spiritual person, one who felt the universe held some higher meaning and purpose. One day, as I was sitting on the steps of my front porch, I looked around in awe of it all. I saw an incredible order to the universe, even in places that seemed chaotic, for even this disorder is a part of the overall program that has always been in place. I understood then that the universe, as I have described it, was the closest thing there will ever be to a God. Now many of you can quickly deduce that since I also view each of us to be the universe, that I believe each of us can view him or herself to be God, as I define God, that is. Even though that is true, I almost always refrain from expressing that point of view because it's too ego-driven and would not be easily understood by most others. In other words, a pantheist who views the universe as God can at the same time consider himself to be a pantheist, as long as he can also view himself to be the universe. But I was not exactly a pantheist yet. I was more in the habit of viewing myself as the universe and not the universe as God, even though I knew both were equally true. Aside from the fundamental laws of the yin and the yang, I didn't quite yet understand the full magnitude of what the universe or God was. It would take about another 10 years before I would feel comfortable enough or have reason enough to regularly refer to the universe or this allness as God. But during this time I was flooded with excitement. Christians probably would have described it as being filled with the Holy Spirit. I felt like I knew some deep secret that no one else knew, and I couldn't wait to somehow share it with the world. Unfortunately, the internet did not exactly exist as it does today. And of course I would later learn, after reading up on Buddha, Parmenides, and Spinoza, that there were others who had come before me who had also glimpsed these truths. I sure wish someone had introduced these philosophers to me at a much earlier age. It would have saved me over 20 years of deep contemplation. On second thoughts, I take that back. I actually enjoyed the experience of coming to many of the same conclusions on my own. Now I just desperately needed to find a way to express these views. Since I had an interest in art, I decided to try and illustrate the concept of oneness in a huge oil painting, 8 feet by 10 feet. Unfortunately, I never got to finish it, and realized I would need a bigger canvas anyway to do it justice, something in the neighborhood of 30 feet by 30 feet. So I would have to wait until I could find a large enough space to hold such a huge canvas. I was also eager to share all these insights with my father, who has always had a love for philosophy, and has always been a very spiritual person, and has always been open to new ideas. We've always enjoyed long philosophical discussions about life, and so there were times when I would try and share these exciting views with him, but he didn't quite understand them, or wasn't quite ready to take them all in, or perhaps he wasn't ready to accept the judgment of a 20-year-old. However, years later my father would become more and more open to these ideas, which I'll get back to explaining in a moment. In 1994, my family picked up and moved again, this time states away, and there wasn't an adequate university nearby, so I decided to take a break from school and eventually jumped into the family business, which was remodeling old houses. While scraping and painting old doors and windows, though, I would find time here and there to work on my art and to think about my personal philosophy. In the year 2000, I had returned to college to major in graphic design. I began to experience for the first time the excitement of learning in a classroom. This was a new experience for me because I had always hated school growing up and was usually a C student. I spent most of my early school years daydreaming and was always off in my thoughts. But to my surprise, I slowly became obsessed with learning. I wanted to absorb all the book knowledge I could. So I took all the meaningful courses I could, like the nature of mathematics, the physical universe, state and local government. I took several art courses, excelled in literature, and took various political science courses. Some of my favorite subjects were psychology, sociology, and social psychology. I even managed to do well in marketing and in French, which were tough courses. College really helped to refine all my self-taught knowledge, which I had spent years acquiring, primarily through my personal experiences and personal insights. Thanks to college, my personal philosophy was more polished now. After graduating, I created my own online illustration business and started paying off my school loans. It was around this time I started referring to the universe as God on a regular basis. At first I did so out of convenience. It helped me to avoid uncomfortable conversations with others who were devout Christians. But eventually I began to prefer this label because I started to learn that the universe was much more than just a mechanical thing. It was when my younger brother started asking me about the perception of red. He has always had a strong interest in artificial intelligence and was trying to determine whether it was possible to get a robot to not just detect the color red, but to actually perceive it. He wondered if the experience of perceiving the color red could be explained purely on a physical level. I too have had similar questions about artificial intelligence, and so we discussed it for hours. I tried to explain to him in a variety of ways how the perception of red must ultimately be a mental assignment due to the physical interaction of light waves and the eye. Of course he already knew all this, and knew more about the anatomy of the eye than I did, but he was still unsatisfied with those answers. He was trying to probe even deeper and wanted to know how the mind ultimately causes this experience of perceiving red. I finally had to end the conversation by letting him know he may be trying to stare too deeply into the light of truth. He reluctantly agreed for the time being, but later concluded that red was simply an element of the mind that could not be fully described in physical terms alone. A few years later, I was reading about the Greek philosopher Plato, who spoke of indestructible ideal forms. Like Socrates before him, he tried to discover the true universal meaning of abstract entities like courage and beauty, which were independent of space and time. He too believed that objects of beauty, for instance, though temporary in time and to our senses, had a real timeless existence beyond the physical realm. Though Plato took the baton from Socrates and really ran with it, he generalized the concept in terms of all reality. He claimed that all things in this decaying and changing world, as it is perceived, are really just inferior physical expressions of their true perfected forms. This led Plato to a two-world view, one which was physical, temporary, imperfect, and false, and one which was non-physical, permanent, perfect, and true, the first being accessible through our senses, and the second being accessible only through our intellect. It seemed to be somewhat similar to what my brother had been trying to get at with the color red, that is, an existence beyond the physical. Right then and there it all clicked for me. I now saw an aspect of the universe I never had before, and a majesty. This final epiphany sealed the deal for me as far as viewing the universe as God-like. It also helped to open a whole new philosophical door for me, inspiring me to expand on Plato's ideal forms, which I now usually refer to as eternal concepts or eternal ideas to denote some additional meaning. Plato mainly focused on the timeless perfection of things that was essentially hidden from our senses. But I wanted to pick up the baton and go even further with it. I was less concerned with the perfection of things and more interested in the fact that there was an underlying conceptual existence to all physical and non-physical things which defies any form of creation. I started thinking how all facets of life, from simple verbs like the act of running to the essence of elaborate works of literature like Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet, are all eternal concepts that go beyond creation or evolution. This even includes eternal concepts of imperfection, like cancer or a broken leg. The very concept of these things couldn't have evolved, nor been invented by man, nor created by some god. They are eternal. Mathematics has to be one of the most obvious examples of this. I now had proof that at least certain aspects of the universe must have always existed and always will. I saw how all these concepts worked in concert to provide a universal guiding force that serves to push us towards a balanced path. I realized there was an entire purposeful program in place that provides everything we know. And I understood how the universe was not only eternal, but had a specific, unchanging, complex identity. I finally felt like I had good reason to call the universe God. I simply had to redefine the term God to separate it from much older conceptions. Anyway, that's how I became a pantheist. Keep in mind, though, I also still consider myself to be what I have termed a pantheist, one who views himself to be the universe.